Well, with no complaints, I'm just going to move forward then. So thanks, everyone who's joining us today. We're recording this for the folks who can't, and this will be posted to the website hopefully later today. And if you haven't had a chance yet, the website has changed. It's a brand new website. So if you visit, poke around, if you find any mistakes, please let us know because we're still kind of making sure all the details are ironed out. So again, thanks for being here with us today. We're going to be going through the LPX review that went out toward the end of the year. I know it took a minute to get the review put together. I apologize for that, but here we are. So without any further ado, we'll just keep moving forward. I wanted to start out today by just kind of going over some of the demographics of the labs that participated. There were 9 Sentinel labs and 1 reference lab NPHL. I left the NPHL results out of these charts. So of the available biochemical tests that the CAP survey, the LPX survey asks about, all 9 labs had the big ones. Gram stain capabilities, of course, catalase oxidase, urease, indole motility, and beta lactamase. Surprising to see that a couple of labs have the e-test or the antibiotic resistance testing available and satellite testing for their rule out and refer. And some of them were used in this case. So where are we? We've got 4 labs in Omaha. Offutt was a participant, 2 in Lincoln, North Platte, and Scotts Bluff. So stretching across the entire state. So as far as employees, we've got 5 labs that are less than 10, and then 1 lab on the opposite side that's got 31 to 40 employees. And then speaking of the employees, reporting labs, 5 labs mentioned that just about a quarter or less than are trained in rule out and refer annually. And so that's on Becky and I, and we are planning on taking the rule out and refer training west again this year, whether that be North Platte or maybe further west, just to try and get everyone involved. That'll be in the fall again, when we'll do our westward training and another training in Omaha, just to try and get as many people involved as we can. Okay, so we'll start the LPX. So this was the first one, LPX 4. It was a simulated eye specimen from a 44-year-old woman with irritation and inflammation of the eye, and the husband is an avid hunter, and she is involved in butchering. We start off here with the gram stain for LPX 4. You can see here the 9 labs that reported. We had 7 called gram-negative coccobacilli and 2 called gram-negative rods. And on the right side here, these are the national results. These are broken up by stain reaction and morphology. So as you can see, majority of the reporting labs across the country called gram-negative coccobacilli, consistent with our Nebraska results, with a sliver of them reporting gram-negative bacilli. So that's pretty consistent with what we see here in the state. And so moving on, if we've got a gram-negative bacilli or coccobacilli, the next question we ask ourselves is, does it grow on McConkey? Which will kind of send us to the left or the right of our testing algorithm here. And so we'll move on to the plate growth. So as you can see, unanimously, all labs reported that there was no growth on the McConkey. And most labs reporting growth on the blood, and all of them reporting growth on the chocolate. And if we look at our national chart here, it's almost identical to the results we saw in Nebraska. So that's good. That's what we want to see. Consistency between our results and the national. So then we'll move on to the hemolysis. We had 7 labs reporting that this organism was non-hemolytic on the blood. 2 labs did not report any hemolysis, either beta or non. And then we can see that that's pretty consistent with the national results again. And then again, all labs reported the McConkey fermentation was not applicable. So following our algorithm with no growth on the McConkey, we move to the right. So we're thinking Francisella, Burkholderia, Brucella. And here was the list of biochemical tests that were run across the state. So there's kind of a lot going on here. The red is positive and the purple is negative. And so we had catalase positive for all 9 labs reporting. Majority of our labs reported positive beta-lactamase, negative oxidase, and negative urease across the board. And so looking at the national results, pretty similar. A lot of labs decided to test the growth in 42-degree incubation. Didn't test the 42-degree, and we had a lot of oxidase testing across the country. Most of them reporting negative, and then a big percentage reporting beta-lactamase positive. So if we look at our spot tests, I think based on the gram stain results and the growth on the McConkey, we've kind of narrowed down the organisms that we might be suspecting as BT organisms, since there was no growth on the MAC. So moving on to our biochemical testing, we had oxidase positive, or catalase positive, sorry, which is all of our BT organisms are going to be catalase positive or weak positive. The big result we had for this organism is our beta-lactamase. Beta-lactamase positive, which is the only one of our BT organisms that is beta-lactamase positive. So that's going to be, that's the big one for our rule out and refer algorithm. Here we had labs that reported that they found oxidase negative and urease negative. So if we look across the board here, all of our results are really only consistent with Francisella tularensis, again, with our beta-lactamase being our big red flag for this organism. So for the LPX, this was a vaccine strain of Francisella, and so the intended responses were suspect Francisella tularensis, refer for confirmation, refer to rule out Francisella tularensis, or gram-negative bacillus/coccobacillus refer to rule out. And then for the reference laboratory, the correct response was confirmed Francisella tularensis. So across Nebraska and nationwide, we had 8 labs that kind of fell inside of those correct responses with the gram-negative bacilli, coccobacilli, refer to rule out Francisella, or suspected Francisella, refer for confirmation to rule out. We had 1 lab reported possible Burkholderia malii/pseudomallii, and this lab, looking at their biochemical tests, they had a negative beta-lactamase. So had that beta-lactamase result been the opposite, they probably would have referred this as a possible Francisella. And so if we look at our national results, again, pretty consistent. Nebraska's results are pretty consistent with the national. So that's good. Again, if there are any questions as I'm going through this, just feel free to jump in. There aren't a whole lot of us here. So feel free to stop me at any time with questions. So we'll move on to LPX5, a simulated blood culture from a 72-year-old male with fever undergoing chemotherapy for melanoma. Excuse me. And just like last time, we'll start with the gram stain. Unanimously, gram-positive rods, our labs reported. And then nationwide, pretty heavy on the gram-positive bacilli reporting. And so with the gram stain result, that really only leaves us one option. There's only one gram-positive rod on our BT list. It's Bacillus anthracis. So I think at this point, everyone kind of knows which way we're leaning, and now we're trying to go through our algorithms. So for the plate growth, everyone reported growth on chocolate and blood and no growth on McConkey. There's a couple extra plates set there that looks like it didn't grow on the CNA or the PEA and the Thayer Martin, which nationally, it looks like we did have a handful of labs that did report growth on either the CNA or PEA, but I don't have much more information which one of those that was. But what we got was the growth on the blood, the growth in the chocolate, no growth in the McConkey, and that's what we're looking for, because that's consistent with our Bacillus anthracis growth on our plates. So we can just keep moving right on down the algorithm. Next thing we look for now that we have our growth is the hemolysis. We had 8 out of 9 labs reporting beta hemolysis. And so in the case of Bacillus anthracis, this would remove any suspicion we have of this being Bacillus anthracis, possible BT organism. So under normal circumstances, our workup could stop here. We had one lab reporting that it was a non-hemolytic organism. So in this case, they would continue with their rule outs. And so for biochemical tests, we see we had 6 labs that continued to rule out, ran the catalase, which they found to be positive, and that is consistent with our Bacillus anthracis. And we had 4 labs continue with the motility, kind of a split decision, not a split decision. We had 4 labs that found that it was modal and 1 lab reporting negative motility. And so for this organism, it was Listeria monocytogenes. The intended response for both Sentinel and LRN reference libraries was non-BT culture, which again, 8 of the 9 labs answered correctly, reported this as a non-BT culture, no further workup. The lab that could not rule out B. anthracis, they're the lab that reported that it was non-hemolytic and negative for motility. So had their findings been consistent with the other 8 labs, they would have ruled it out. But in this case, with their biochemical and hemolysis results, they're correct. They could not rule out anthrax. And finally, we've got LPX6, a simulated sputum specimen from a 22-year-old with a fever after attending baseball spring training in Arizona. And so like the other 2, we'll start with the gram stain. Again, unanimously gram negative, similar to our first organism. We had 7 calling gram negative coccobacilli and 2 calling gram negative rods. And that's consistent with the national gram stain results. Handful of labs calling gram positive cocci, which is interesting at the national level. But as far as our Nebraska labs go, consistently gram negative rods, gram negative coccobacilli. So the plate growth. For the most part, we called no growth on the blood. We had 2 labs that that said there was some growth. Uh, Everyone called growth in the chocolate, and then unanimously again, no growth on the McConkey. So similar to our first organism, we had a gram-negative bacilli, coccobacilli. So then we look for the McConkey growth to decide which way we're going to go, to the left or the right. This one had no or poor growth on the MAC. Everyone reported that there was no growth. So again, we're looking at our 3 gram-negative coccobacilli, the tularemia, the Burkholderia mallei, and the brucella. Since there was little or poor growth on the blood plate, um, all labs reported not applicable for the hemolysis. Nationally, kind of right in line with that. And then again, not applicable for the fermentation on the MAC because everyone reported that there was no growth. So similar to our first organism, looking at the gram stain, we kind of have a handful of organisms that we can be looking at. Really, just the one has no or poor growth on the blood plate. Again, that's going to be our Francisella tularensis, based on the growth of the blood. So if you've seen this before, I'm sure everyone's seen this before. This is just our algorithm in the bench guide, the NPHL bench guide. So if we're considering Francisella tularensis, we've got our gram stain and our growth. Next, we're going to look at the 3 big tests we run are the oxidase, the catalase, and the beta-lactamase. And so here, I apologize, here my beta-lactamase results got flipped. So we actually had 6 labs that reported the negative beta-lactamase. And that's the only one on here that I couldn't get the bars to flip once it changed my number. So I'll have to go back to the original document and change that. So we had 6 labs reporting negative beta-lactamase and 5 of them reporting positive oxidase, which is pretty consistent with our national results. I took the not performed out of this one. There was a lot of tests on this one that weren't performed, so I took it out of the Nebraska results just to kind of make them easier to see who did what. And so going through the biochem test results, all 9 labs should have been able to rule out tularemia by beta-lactamase and oxidase. So in the beta-lactamase testing, there were 3 labs who reported something other than beta-lactamase negative. So there was 2 labs reported beta-lactamase not performed, and 1 lab reporting beta-lactamase negative. But of those 3 labs, they all reported oxidase positive. So that effectively should have ruled out tularemia one way or the other for all 9 labs. So what this was is it was a Haemophilus influenza. And so the intended response for sentinel and reference labs was non-BT culture. And similar to the first one, we had 8 labs that did report non-BT culture. And a note on the lab unable to rule out tularemia. They reported a positive beta-lactamase, but also a positive oxidase. So they should have been able to rule it out. My guess is they responded strictly based on their beta-lactamase because it's like we mentioned in the first one, it's a big red flag for Francisella tularensis. So that's all 3 of our organisms. Are there any questions? Again, this is being recorded. We'll put it up for laboratory for managers to show the rest of their labs, or if anyone wasn't able to be with us today. So yeah, I'll open it up for some quick questions. Otherwise, that's all I have, short and sweet. Okay, no questions. Thanks everybody for joining me.
Thank you.
There will be news to come about future BT trainings, and try to get one out west again, just like we did last year. So, okay, everybody, stay warm.